Hey everybody, welcome to Ask SepiSolar Anything with our very special guest, Jigar Shah. Jigar is joining us today to answer all of your questions about entrepreneurship, investing, and pretty much so many other things that he's been through over the past 20 years of his solar career. Before we start, I just want to go over some quick ground rules. If you're dialing in on the phone, you're going to have to press *6 to ask a question, and you'll go into a queue. If you're on the web, and that's kind of the best way to do it, because you'll see Jigar and Josh Weiner, our CEO, then ask your question through the chat bubble, which should be in front of you. That's going to be the best way to do it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to SepiSolar CEO, Josh Weiner.
Thank you, Tor. Everybody, it's great to have you back again. For those of you that it's your first time, welcome. You're going to love this. We're going to have today's show with Jigar Shah, as Tor mentioned. For those of you who are returning, this is going to be a little different of a format than we're used to. Instead, this time I really want us to make, as best use of Jigar's time and all of yours as possible to get, to really get the ropes and knowledge and expertise that Jigar has with respect to solar and also with respect to storage. Jigar's super excited to have you here. We haven't actually spent a lot of time in person, but if it's here in public, even better, so just super excited. Yeah, super excited to be with you and to meet you, and I think this is going to be an excellent show. I really think of you as, you are the pioneer in solar, and I think also in many ways, storage as well. Super excited to hear your thoughts and opinions and advice on so many of these aspects that we encounter on a regular basis through SepiSolar as an engineering and design firm, but that you come at from the finance, investor, money side of the equation. And money makes the whole world go around. So it's a very important part of the equation that engineers like us need to understand and help in any way we can. So with that, just to introduce you for our guests, for the audience, if any of you are not familiar with Jigar's solar and clean energy career, he's well known for pioneering the first power purchase agreement in solar when he co-founded Sun Edison in 2003. And then after it was acquired, for those of you who don't know, Sun Edison got acquired in 2008, Jigar then went on to co-found Generate Capital, which is a specialty finance company that partners with, I believe, with both project developers and technology manufacturers to finance I think you finance a lot of things, from energy, clean water, food, and other critical infrastructure and resources. Jigar's also wrote a book, Creating Climate Wealth, Unlocking the Impact Economy. He was the first CEO of the Rocky Mountain Institute's Carbon War Room, which was also co-founded by Sir Richard Branson. And by the way, just a small footnote, we actually, SepiSolar, we did the preliminary design for Richard Branson's Necker Island for his neighborhood. So we could chat about that a little later if we want. But awesome. Jigar, so excited to have you. For my first question, just to kick us off, if that's okay, I wanted to ask you, what's next? What's on your mind? What gets you up in the morning? What's exciting? What's coming up next for us for solar?
Well, look, I think on the solar front, there's a lot of things that are next, right? I mean, it's only been in the last 4 or 5 years that we've even allowed, for instance, trackers to become really popular on utility scale solar, right? Now a lot of the trackers are adding, incredible amounts of artificial intelligence and machine learning and figuring out exactly how to maximize energy production. And then you also have battery storage and other things that are being integrated to solar. So I think that solar continues to be the engine by which a lot of innovations are being implemented. And so I think what's next with solar is a lot more incremental improvement. 1% here, 1% there, 1% there. And as all of us know, those 1% really add up, and it's resulted in solar being one of the most cost-effective technologies available today.
Gotcha. So for solar, it's more just step-by-step incremental continuous improvements, but then maybe for other sides of, say, storage, it could be more discontinuous or bigger step functions. Is that fair to say?
But I just think that in general, we don't really live in the world of step functions, right? We sort of, as solar developers, right, we've got, 7,000 of these firms now in the United States who are actively installing solar power. And, those 7,000 firms make their bread and butter business through technologies that are familiar with customers. And so, you can add a Tesla Powerwall, you can add a Sonnen battery. I've got a Pika energy facility in my basement in my house. We've got, you can add a whole house building control, smart home technologies where I can control, like the circuits in my house from my phone, which is cool, using Lumen, energy technology. But ultimately, those all are viewed by the marketplace as incremental, even if they feel like more than that for us, right? Because anything other than incremental scares the crap out of the customer.
Right. Yeah, so then you bring up an interesting point about customer perception and maybe risk management or cost control or what the customer wants, basically. Do you think that customers want storage, or they just want more solar or better enhanced solar, and storage is maybe just a tool to make solar more palatable or better or optimized or something?
Yeah, I don't think customers want storage. I think, I don't want storage, although I have it. What I want is, power when the power goes out, right? So, and storage happens to be the medium by which I do that, as opposed to a diesel generator or a natural gas generator.
Yeah. So do you see a place for financing then with storage? I mean, if storage is just an additional widget or thing that that solves a problem or gets a customer one step further, does that have a place at Generate Capital or in the financing landscape? Is that something?
Well, we own a lot of storage, and we own a lot of solar plus storage, and so we certainly are very active in the space. I think for residential, it's really a FICO score thing. So I think Sunrun did about 1,000 storage systems in the last securitization that they did. And then I think when it comes to utility scale, there's certainly some people who are leaning in, like NextEra, who's said, yeah, we're happy to finance storage when we get paid a capacity payment from the utility. And then, there's lots of other smaller developers who aren't quite getting positive responses from their financing partners. And so, they're sort of all waiting for a better, financing package before they can offer offer storage, right? So we're sort of in the middle of all of it. And storage, unlike solar, doesn't intrinsically actually add value, right? It only adds value to the extent that someone's willing to pay you for that. So if someone pays you a capacity payment, great. If someone says, hey, you can charge it 0 cents during the evening and discharge it, 10 cents during the day, then maybe you can make money on that. There's demand charge savings in commercial buildings, but in general, it's not like solar where you're like, hey, you're producing a kilowatt hour and then the kilowatt hour has value. In storage, it has a bunch of services, and if no one's willing to pay you for those services, then it's worthless.
Gotcha. So yeah, that resonates a lot because for us as an engineering firm, solar is sort of like go big or go home, right? The more kilowatt hours, the more money, and it's very linear. In a way, it's very linear. It's the bigger the better. With storage, it's more Goldilocks kind of a problem. You want to just size it just right. You want to put it in just the right market and just the right interconnection and with the right technology. You want it to optimize the system as opposed to just having more kilowatt hours.
That's right.
So I'm going to ask a selfish question here because we do a lot of sizing of storage systems. How does system sizing, I guess, or designing of the storage system, is that a problem you deal with? Does it make a big impact on the financeability?
It's a huge problem, right? I mean, people like yourself generally want like 3 years of data at 15-minute load data to basically figure out what the storage should be, and that's confusing and obviously not great for sales. In general, what we do is we use storage. We size storage at roughly 25% of the size of the solar. So, so if the solar is a megawatt, the storage is like 250 kilowatts, and that's basically because at that level, you can pretty much ensure that you can save 250 kilowatts of demand charges throughout the year. Anything above that, and you really need to like look deeply into the data to see whether it's possible.
Gotcha. So let's see. Going along those same lines, I mean, so you're financing storage projects. You own storage projects today. What do you see as like the biggest challenges that you come across in financing these systems? Do you find yourself leaving money on the table when you go by your 25% sort of a rule? Do you find yourself running into situations where sizing is a big, spending a lot of time reviewing data to size the system is important, or is it volatile market dynamics and changing policies that invoke risk into the project? Is it the usual stuff?
I would say the latter is not a problem for us, like changing market conditions or things that you either know or you don't know when you actually build the project and you put the rest of the risks onto the customer. So I don't know that that's a big risk for us as the investor. I think that the bigger challenge is honestly just like getting customer buy-in to the entire premise of savings from the storage, right? It's one thing if the customer just says, I want resilience and I want backup and I'm willing to pay a fixed $500 a month for the storage, and that's fine, right? It's another thing when you do like some sort of shared savings with the customer on the demand charge side, and if the software fails you and doesn't actually dispatch the battery when it's supposed to, then you get screwed, right? And so then if you're going to get screwed, then the question is like, whose warranty do you go on, right? Like the software company's warranty is usually pretty weak. So is it the company that makes the battery package? Is it like, some larger industrial company that's backing it, that's, wrapping the system and providing a much deeper and more well-financed warranty? And those are the basic questions that people ask, right? And I think it's amazing how confused people are around what we're asking for, but ultimately we're just asking to get paid back over time. And so, to the extent that we think that getting paid back over time is at risk, then we ask for these protections.
Gotcha.
Let's go to some audience questions. Everybody, if you're on the phone, you're going to have to dial *6. If you are on the web, then instead of doing it through the chat, the question and answer function, just dump your question into the chat box that should be in front of you, and put your questions there, and we'll get to your questions. All right, so we're going to start the Q&A session right now.
It started.
It started. All right, who wants to ask Jigar your first question? Please put it in the chat box, or if you're you're dialing in, dial *6. Really, people, come on. All right. Well, while people are thinking about what they want to ask Jigar,
other questions coming in from the chat box?
Yeah, nobody's coming in the chat box yet, but I'm sure people are just thinking about the great questions they want to ask Jigar. So I will ask Jigar a quick question. When you are, what's your definition of bankability these days? I mean, everybody has their own different ones. When Generate Capital is thinking about whether a storage product is bankable or any solar product that's coming on that's new, I mean, what do you consider about that?
Well, in general, I mean, what I'd say is that bankability has always meant the same thing, right? Which is what's my sort of likelihood of getting paid back over the next 10 years, 20 years, whatever the life of the asset is, right? And one way to do it is just to cheat and say, well, if it's a big company who has a strong balance sheet with a good credit rating, then I can rely on them to be around to honor their warranty. Another way to do it is to actually have physical units in the field, right? So when you have a technology that's been in the field for 20 years, you can say, well, I sort of just can do due diligence on the way that those batteries or fuel cells or trackers or others performed over the last 20 years, and I can tell whether they did a good job, right? I think there's a lot of people who get, sort of psyched out by bankability and think that it's sort of this word that means that we don't want to fund innovation. And to some degree, they're right? I mean, like if you're an infrastructure investor, the goal is not to invest in newfangled stuff, right? The goal is to invest in things that you think are going to last for 20 years and make you a solid rate of return.
Right. So for new technology, that's too risky? I mean, because there's just no bankability there?
Well, it's not about new technology, right? It's about whether I think it's going to work, right? So if the new technology is basically old technology just repackaged, then I can diligence it. If it's a brand new chemistry that came out of the lab at MIT, then I have no idea whether it's going to be stable and work well for the next 10 years.
Right. All right. We do have some questions. All right. So I'm going to go with one question right now. Andrew asks, when you are looking to invest in a company, how deeply do you look at the management team versus the technology itself? What are some of the key elements you look for in a successful team?
Well, so we don't invest in companies directly. We invest in the deployment of their technology, right? So it's sort of like we provide a project finance vehicle for companies so that their customers don't have to pay cash for their wares, but instead can sign a as-a-service agreement for their technology, right? And so in that case, we're really looking at the technology itself to see whether it works and whether it's got enough of a track record to make us think we're going to get paid back. And then on the management team side, what we're really looking for is to see whether they actually have the capabilities of selling enough stuff. Because one of our other risks are, even if the technology works, if we only put $4 million out the door and we intended to put $40 million out the door, well, the $4 million costs a lot more for us to maintain and manage for the next 10 years. And so you end up actually, being soured on the relationship if they don't get to the volume targets that you've set.
Okay, great. All right, let's do one from the telephone lines. Again, if you are dialing in, dial *6, and we're going to choose this person right here. Hey, you're on.
Hello, this is Manisha Rane Fondacaro from Albany, New York. My question, who in your opinion are low-hanging fruit customers for selling storage, residential, C&I, or utility?
No, it's a great question. I think that on the storage side, for residential, it's really just whoever would buy diesel or natural gas engines, right? Like, so if you think about a diesel engine customer, right, like in DC, when a hurricane is threatening the coast, Home Depot comes up with 2 truckloads worth of generators and they sell out in 45 minutes, right? And those people spend between $8,000 and $20,000 to put those diesel generators in their house, right? They have to have a concrete pad laid in the back, a place for the fuel. They have to do testing every year. It's sort of really expensive, right? So clearly those people believe that having storage or having some sort of backup is valuable to protect their family or their business or their revenue or whatever it is. And so those are the people you're focused on there. On C&I, I think it's very challenging. I actually don't think there's a lot of C&I customers who are ideal for storage. There's certainly some who care a lot about resiliency, like grocery stores and folks like that, where they might lose produce or other things. There's others who are mandated by law. So for instance, like hotels are mandated to have a generator to work the elevator. They don't need a generator to work the elevator. You could actually use a battery to work the elevator during the emergency period. So there's folks like that in those niches. And on the utility scale, there really is no market for batteries and utility scale projects unless you get paid. So if the utility company that signs the PPA pays you a capacity payment, then you put in storage. If they don't pay you a capacity payment, you don't put in storage. And so it's a pretty binary thing on the utility scale side.
Okay, we have another question from Joe Horst. Jigar, do you always finance through a PPA? And I'll just add to that, if not, how do you evaluate how to finance your projects and investments?
Well, so no, the answer is not a PPA. I mean, like the PPA is basically a pay for specific unit, right? So it's like pay per kilowatt hour, pay for produce that's grown in a grow house. It's, pay for specific items to be done. In some cases, it's really just debt, right? So like for energy efficiency, I don't know that it makes a lot of sense most times to actually do a full audit and figure out whether the energy efficiency is actually getting generated every month. And so a lot of times you do stipulated savings and it's really just debt that you're financing. In other places for like transportation, you'd want to, it's great to say that I want to do a cost per mile PPA, but it's not so easy to do. On the baseline side, what happens if the business goes out of business and the truck gets sidelined? Do you not get paid anything, right? So in each situation, it's really about likelihood of getting paid back and figuring out what the use case is for the technology and how, you might actually get paid back over time.
Okay, great. We've got another question. This is maybe a little controversial, but let's see how it goes. Jerry, it's SepiSolar anything. So Sam asks, how do you think installers that have installed Enphase 48 years ago should handle not being reimbursed for servicing the Enphase warranty issues, especially the installers that helped build Enphase from the beginning? Because Enphase is not reimbursing installers right now for warranty work, and that's harmful to the homeowner as well as to the installer. Do you want to handle that one, or do you want to pass?
No, I mean, it's fine. I think that in general, Enphase is a company that is publicly traded. They absolutely feel like, their new generation products work better than their old generation products. The old generation products had some issues, and they're finding a lot of failures in Hawaii and other markets. And, I think the question for Enphase is really around, like, what does this mean for their business, right? I mean, Tor, you probably can answer this better than I can, which is that when you start screwing over, these folks who are actually doing the warranty pieces, then they are probably not going to promote your product, and they're probably going to badmouth your product, right? And but at the same time, you may not have the money to pay them. So you sort of, make the business decision the best you can and see where it goes. But I certainly think that for folks who aren't getting reimbursed for warranty issues, they're probably not, going to have a positive experience with Enphase that they're going to talk about in the future. And I agree with that having non-working systems in Hawaii and other places is harmful for the owner and the installer. And I think Enphase is obviously banking on the fact that those installers care so deeply for their homeowners that they're going to suck it up and do it for free.
Yeah, I mean, I get from a brand perspective, from a service perspective, I would agree with you that essentially if Enphase isn't covering it anymore and that's in their contracts, then you as the installer do need to do that service and bite the bullet, because that homeowner's recommendation is going to be far more valuable to you than that homeowner's dissatisfaction with your service. And then they're going to tell their neighbors and friends that you guys aren't living up to delivering what you promised. So that would be my perspective on that. Unfortunately, that it's a lost investment.
And I would acknowledge, the person who asked the question. I mean, there are a lot of installers who I know for a fact have experienced those failures and not taking care of the customer as a result. And just, you can put the blame on somebody else and walk away, but that customer at the end of the day is still damaged and out of what they thought they paid for. So the fact that you're standing up for the customer and taking care of them and taking your frustration to Enphase, I think is worth acknowledging. It's unfortunately a bit too rare in this industry for people to stand behind their customers.
Yep. Let's go to Jay. Jay asks, what steps can we take as an industry to help educate AHJ's, authorities having jurisdictions, for people who don't know that acronym, to be more accepting standardized with PV and PV plus storage permitting processes nationwide? That's a question near and dear to our hearts as well, Jigar. What do we do?
Well, look, I think the solar industry in general has tried to take the easy way out in states outside of California and really said, why don't we create best practices? Why don't we do a Sunshot grant? Why don't we have like webinars and trainings? And frankly, I don't think any of that really works. It's important to put some, documentation in place, and that part's fine, but ultimately you have to go in and talk to the relevant authorities yourself, right? I mean, I've talked to most of the people in Montgomery County to make sure that my solar plus storage system is streamlined, and it was. And, I think that I've paved the way for a lot of other people who want to put in solar plus storage to have a streamlined process too. But that's how this works. It's all individual people, and you have to actually spend the time educating your city council members and your mayors and your permit folks on why this is a good thing for your jurisdiction, and get them to be more accepting and thoughtful about supporting you, right? So that's how the United States of America works. We don't go from a top-down basis on construction permits.
Do you think that we'll ever have any national permitting standards that will actually be, part of the national electric code, and everybody will apply the same national electric code? Never.
No, we won't do that, and you don't want that either. So, I mean, everybody says that they want it until they realize that in the wrong hand, someone can use that to actually ban solar storage nationwide.
That's a good point. I guess we have to wait 5 years until we can maybe trust that won't happen. All right, moving on. Andrew asks, what are some of the recent upcoming changes / innovations in the solar industry besides increasing energy storage that you find most exciting?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I find exciting is that there are a tremendous number of people who are working to basically take your home for all intents and purposes and turn it into a microgrid, right? I mean, I think that when you think about what Arizona is doing to screw over their customers with demand charges on solar, what a lot of people are doing is saying, well, then screw it. Why don't we just actually put a battery in solar, and we will just work with the utility company to not net meter, right? We just won't have any net export, and we'll make sure we'll use our electric vehicle and other batteries in the house and air conditioning system, and actually put it onto a control system that matches the load in the home to the solar PV system. And through that we can avoid residential demand charges and other types of things. And I think the technology is already there to do that. And now the software is getting better and better to do that. And then the next stage in the pipeline is going to be putting a battery and a rectifier bridge at the meter, right? And just basically making your house DC from the perspective of the utility, right? So you could actually just put in a rectifier bridge at the meter, turn all the power DC, combine it with the solar there, and then invert the power into AC to power the home. So you don't have to convert everything in your house to DC, maybe one circuit or something. But by doing that, you basically make it so that the utility can't see what's going on in your house. And if they can't see what's going on in your house, then they really have no say in what you do.
Jigar, do you think people will get so emotionally outraged over time with the policies that utilities are bestowing upon their customer base that they're just going to do this on their own and buy their own equipment and develop these projects single-handedly, or do you think somebody's going to step up to, customers are used to buying units, like you said, kilowatt hours or produce. Who's going to provide the microgrid unit to those customers?
A lot of people will. I mean, the Pika energy system that I have is only one step away from doing that. So all you really need to do is to put a rectifier bridge at the meter, right? Once you turn the power into DC power, then you basically are air gapping your house. And so now the utility can't see what's going on in your house. You could put a fuel cell, CHP system, battery storage, solar, whatever, and the utility doesn't care because you've air gapped your house.
Okay. we got another follow-up from Andrew. Question to the house microgrid format. How does cybersecurity come into play in this context to make this more robust? Are you worried about cybersecurity with your house, Jigar?
No.
Okay. Well, there's the follow-up to that, Andrew. I think.
Everyone's pissed off about, everyone is ginned up about cybersecurity, but the utility grid itself is terrible from a cybersecurity standpoint, right? And so to suggest that my house is less secure than the utility system is crazy.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I think it starts at the utility for sure.
What I would add too is the whole paradigm of distributed generation and breaking apart generation, distributing it across the network is exactly what distributed computing did for the internet. There are lots of benefits and costs, of course, and revenues, and programs that can be put in place, but also cybersecurity, NERC compliance. Those things really start to break down because when you have centralized infrastructure, terrorists take out one transformer and it takes down 10,000, 100,000, or a million homes. When it's distributed across a bunch of 10 kilowatt units distributed in the hundreds of thousands and millions, it was much harder to hack hundreds of millions of computers than one computer, or hundreds of millions of systems instead of one system.
Yeah,
yep.
Totally agree.
Okay, Manisha asks, what are your thoughts on marrying storage with solar and wind? Will this model fly in the U.S.? If not, what would take this model to work? It's being heavily promoted in Australia right now.
So in general, what I'd say is that the vast majority of wind turbines that are in this distributed wind category, that are sub 100 kilowatt wind turbines, haven't really improved in over 15 years. There's some, basic improvements in blade design and some gearbox benefits, but ultimately they still are the same things that were installed by Berge or the Atlantic Orient Corporation or Northern Wind Power or Southwest Wind Power or others. And those are all really difficult machines, right? They're very noisy and very, very expensive to fix. And so, while solar plus wind plus batteries make sense, the number of people who are trained in how to manage and maintain wind turbines throughout the United States at least is pretty small. And so my sense is that from a customer's perspective, you're taking a lot of risk. And the folks that I know who have residential wind turbines have had huge issues with, getting proper maintenance done.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? If you're on the telephone lines, dial *6. If you're logging in online, please do it through the chat window.
Until the next question comes in, I actually want to continue down the microgrid road, if that's okay. I'm wondering, do you see blockchain, the energy blockchain, fitting into that paradigm? Or do you think it's hype?
Yeah, I don't understand the term. So, no. I mean, ultimately, blockchain is technology that's sort of 25 plus years old. And it basically refers to, having independent folks sort of verify these, transactions on the chain, and you can make it more automated and all this other stuff. But ultimately, to me, that's a process improvement. So it's like you asking me, what do you think about Salesforce being added to the solar system? I don't give a shit. So if blockchain actually makes transaction costs cheaper and more stuff can be done at much smaller incremental dollar numbers, that's great. But I don't think blockchain is necessarily, the end-all be-all. There's a question on LinkedIn, which is, do you see project financing getting any less risk-averse in the context of newish renewable technology investments? And, I think this is a similar question to what we had before. In general, there is no such thing as, money being risk-averse or not risk-averse or newish renewable technologies or non-newish, right? Like you either believe that you're going to get paid back, then if you believe that you're going to get paid back for sure, then your local bank will give you investments or money at 5 or 6%. And if you think you probably will get paid back, but you're taking more risk, then you get double-digit returns like we get, right? And then if you think that you have no freaking idea whether you're going to get paid back, then you're a venture capital investor and you invest in, the company and hope that all of the technical milestones will reach, but then you want a 10x return, right? So like that's how this works, right? Like it's not a finance company's job to take a lot of risk. That's the entrepreneur's job. It's the finance company's job to figure out like how much risk you're asking them to take and then to bucket you in whatever, bucket you deserve to be in with the money that they have on their balance sheet.
Cool. All right. Any other questions from the audience?
So actually, to that point, then I mean, it sounds like when people ask about risk profiles or risk adjusting projects, I mean, what would you say is the pain if it's not the financer's job to understand or to really to be the entrepreneur basically, or to take that risk? It's really about getting paid. Then what are some of your pain points? Are they what's the biggest problem I guess you deal with on a regular basis if it's not risk of new technologies or new or old or
So my biggest challenge in general, it's a good question, is that I find that people just don't understand how project finance works or how banks work, right? And so they just they're like, well, why won't you give me money? And when you explain to them, they're like, well, I didn't know that that's how things worked. And I was like, well,
yeah,
that's very basic. And so I think that there is a responsibility on all of our parts to educate people on how project finance works, right? You have a feedstock contract. You have basically there's three main things to project finance, right? Like you have a contract that you believe is solid enough that you're going to get paid back. Two, you think that the technology is actually going to work as promised during the contracted period. And three is that you actually have a group whose job it is to do the maintenance on that technology to make sure that it actually performs at high levels of availability throughout that period of time, right? That's it, right? If you believe that that's true, then it's worthy of finance. And if you don't believe it's true, then it's worthy of venture capital or private equity or whatever it is, right? Like that, it's not more basic than that, but it's amazing to me how many people come to me and say, I think my technology is great, it's a new battery technology, it's going to work. I was like, well, how much data do you have? I've got 90 days of data on it, and I did my PhD thesis in it. And I was like, well, that's not enough to convince me it's going to last for 20 years.
Yeah. Another thing that this is hitting on for me personally, just because I see both finance. I think some people think of financing projects like a formula, like if you check all these boxes, or if you fit into this set of criteria or parameters, then you should cross the finish line and become financeable. And in a way, engineering is looked at the same way. A project, if a roof or an electrical distribution system or a set of products check these boxes or meet these criteria, then the system should be able to be put together. But it still requires somebody with in-depth knowledge and experience to go through those parameters, vet them, check them, make sure dots align, and then when somebody actually does that good, hard, honest work, money flows, or projects get permits, or whatever happens. Do you see as time goes on, services versus products being more important than the other, or do you see that as a pain point in the industry? One thing I've always thought about is, there's so many new products always coming out all the time. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of services out there aside from maybe EPCing, which is kind of like a service, in your role, financing projects, or in SepiSolar's role, engineering them. What do you see the role, I guess, for services in solar? Is it the same?
I mean, to the extent that services actually are conferring, some sort of legitimacy to projects, right? Whether it's an independent engineer or, like certification work or folks just backing the quality of their work as an EPC, et cetera, right? Then it does unlock capital, right? So I think services will have more and more of a role to play going forward.
Yep. So another question I had for you was, like we talked earlier about how storage, for example, only pays if there's a revenue stream for it, if there's something set up to reimburse the value that it brings to a project. Do you think policy then is a major driver of our industry? Since if an incremental improvement to solar is adding storage, or the next logical revolution is microgrids and grid detection, things like that, do you see policy playing a role in that? And do you think I've been personally very surprised how little tweaks or changes can make a world of difference. Like, for example, just a couple Fridays ago, we got the CPUC to approve DC-coupled solar plus storage to be NEM compliant. And I thought it was such a funny process, because there really was no new innovation, no new rules, no new policies. Everything's already there. It just took somebody to say, yeah, this particular system configuration complies with existing codes, rules, and policies. So yeah, like, there's no change here. Go ahead.
But I think that's been the story of our life, right? Like, I don't know that that's actually been a new change, right? I think in general the solar industry has been driven by people who just ask for things, and sometimes they get it, and sometimes they have to fight for it. But ultimately, like, all of this is government regulated, utility regulated, CPC regulated, whatever, right? Like participating in this ecosystem is regulated. And so I think that, it always takes people who, file comments and ask for permission or protest on the, streets of Sacramento to get SB 700 passed or whatever, right? So, like, that's how all of this works. It's shocking to me when people don't realize that, like, all of our markets are, concocted by
Right. Right. Yeah, and I'm surprised too how many ways you don't even need policy directly. You can, like in this DC coupled solar plus storage kind of framework, there were ways to just add storage, and no policy plays no part. I mean, or a very small part, just in
policy
just
plays
asking.
a big part. You mean that there's no additional legislation required?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Policy plays a big part, but it wasn't in this particular case, like you said. Sometimes you ask for something and you get it, and then suddenly it just unlocks a whole lot of value for the customer. Like, I mean, by a factor of 2 or 3, like, adds value, and it's crazy that something so seemingly like in the weeds, it's just threading a few nuanced needles can unlock value like that in such a big way. And so it's surprising to me that. In some ways, it takes somebody who's looking really closely at all these various rules and requirements, sort of like being a tax attorney, I guess. When you look at the rules so much and you get used to them, you find the loopholes, or you find where the weaknesses are, or what the opportunities are that should or shouldn't be there, and you ask the question and you might get it.
Yeah, totally.
We've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So first one from Manisha is, Jigar, what, in your opinion, is the bottleneck for expanding storage right now? Is it policies, or are we in the early stage of energy storage usage and investors are risk averse, or what? What do you think is the main reason why? I mean, is it cost? What do you say?
Yeah, I don't think there are any bottlenecks for storage. So I think people are pushing as hard as they can in Massachusetts, California, New York, other places, and their engineers are taking time to finish the engineering, and salespeople are taking time to convince customers to do stuff. Investors are, financing like there's no tomorrow. I've been shocked at how low the interest rates have gotten on, investment in storage assets. And so I don't think there's any bottlenecks right now. I just think that the storage industry has to catch up to the opportunity set in front of them.
Wow, terrific. Okay, we've got a couple more. With 5G on the horizon and explosive growth of IoT connecting electronics, do you see privately owned renewable energy leading the charge to fuel this massive transition, or do you see it more controlled by utilities? Can deployment keep up with demand in terms of EV charging, station storage, etc.?
Well, I don't know exactly where Jay is coming from the question, but I can answer in a couple different ways. So 5G is, for those who don't know, is the next iteration after 4G and 3G for cellular technology.
Right.
And in general, the problem with 5G is it doesn't really go through walls and that kind of stuff very well, and so it actually requires a lot more units to work. So you can imagine when you do 5G in your home for Wi-Fi, it's super fast, but when you go upstairs, you have to go back to the original sort of Wi-Fi because it just doesn't go through walls. So we've certainly been pitched a lot of 5G rollouts to finance for municipal buildings, because if they want to take advantage of 5G, they sort of need all these booster signals to go in all around the building. And a lot of energy efficiency companies have said they'll just roll that into their ESCO frameworks. And so when they do LED lighting retrofits, they'll also put in these 5G boosters at the same time. And so I think that the energy efficiency companies are going to, play a big role in rolling out 5G. So, I think that's pretty cool. I think on the EV charging stations and other things that people are talking about, I think that's really more about hotspot, Wi-Fi, and that kind of stuff, sort of smart city rollouts. But I'm not sure what they mean there.
Yeah. Okay, another question from Andrew. What are some of the key ways that balance of system costs for solar are coming down in the near future, in your view?
Yeah, so I find all of these questions around balance of system cost to be a misnomer. I think the U.S. is already super damn cheap at installing solar. I think, because of the 30% tax credit, we have very high margins, and we allow for very inefficient solar installers to continue to stay in business. But that'll certainly change, in 2020 in California, for instance, when, it would not be surprising to me if new home construction solar gets installed for, 15 cents a watt more than it costs in Germany, which is in Germany, I think they're down to €1 a watt installed. So my sense is in the U.S. it'll probably be $1.40 a watt installed for residential solar. So I don't think residential solar will be expensive in new home construction. So then the question is, why is it expensive everywhere else? And I think it's expensive everywhere else because it can be. Customers are paying 22 cents a kilowatt hour for power, and you can charge $4 a watt and still make the customer save money, right? So why not charge them, the full value?
Do you have any tips actually for an efficient residential commercial installer? What's going to make them survive as competition increases and everything else? You're always talking about that the most efficient are going to survive. So what are your criteria for really a really great efficient residential commercial company?
Well, in general, it's the use of software, right? In general, there are some companies who are determined to actually do a high quality job, and as they grow, to use software and use all the tools that are available to make sure that they have good quality and all those things, right? And some folks just wing it. And the folks who wing it do fine when they're doing 4 systems a month, and when they actually start doing 4 systems a week, they start making mistakes, and they forget to ship certain parts to the site, and then they have to go to Home Depot and backfill, and the customer doesn't get a system in 4 hours. It ends up taking 2 days to do the install, and it's very typical, right? And those companies, some of them may survive just because they've got really, charming good looks and they're able to convince people to keep trusting them. But most of them are going to go out of business because they're going to be like, because other folks are going to be able to really optimize the process. Not unlike in my neighborhood, right? My neighborhood is in Bethesda, Maryland, has a lot of old homes from the 1940s, and there are these builders who tear down the homes and build, McMansions on top of them. And some of those builders can tear down an old home and build a new one and have someone move in 9 months. And some of them, 18 months later, they're still finishing the house, right? Those folks who are finishing the house 18 months later just lost money on that deal. And those folks who build it in 9 months are making a ton of money, right? That's just how this works.
Yeah. Do you see the tax credit sunsetting changing that story, or if anything, accelerating it?
Well, I certainly in 2012 was the first person to, push to get rid of our tax credits because I thought it was artificially keeping solar prices too high. And I think I was right and vindicated on that. I think a lot of people now regret the fact that we didn't take the chance in 2015 to sunset our tax credits sooner. And so you're creating all these like misnomers where corporate PPAs are, trading for 2 cents, 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour for solar, which makes no sense whatsoever, except that we're over subsidizing the crap out of utility scale solar with these tax credits and depreciation. And so it sort of is what it is. But I do think that when we get rid of the tax credits, particularly for residential and commercial, you're going to find a floodgate of financing that comes in from people who currently aren't sophisticated around how to monetize tax credits. And you'll find that all this like PhD level complexity around tax credit financing, which I unfortunately am an expert in, will not be necessary anymore, which will be great because then we'll be able to democratize, solar better.
Do you see the recent bill passing of 100% renewables as being a positive step in the right direction? Is that something you think the whole country should embrace, not just California? If you were the energy...
Super necessary, and it's one that I fought for pretty hard. I think in general, remember, it's not 100% renewables, it's 100% zero carbon. And so I think it's an important distinction. But I think also that it basically sets this Apollo-like framework saying we will figure this out, right? And I think that's critical because we don't have all the answers, right? I mean, that's the truth. That being said, we are committing ourselves to working together to get all the answers and to put this thing together. And I think that's super awesome.
Does that mean there's the distinction between no carbon versus renewables? Do you think that speaks to there needing to be a reasonable balance between different sources of energy? It's not like one winner or one take all. It's all about a good, healthy mix.
Yeah, I think that in general, when we decide that some technologies are allowed in the game and other technologies don't have a right to play in the game, we limit the total amount of flexibility that we have to meet these really stringent goals. And I think what we should all care about is carbon, right? Renewable energy is just one tool in the carbon toolbox, but we should all care about carbon.
Great. Any other? Yeah, I guess that's it. We're at almost at the top of the hour. So, Jigar, thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Yeah, Jigar, thanks so much.
My pleasure. This was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate everyone's active participation. And I'm pretty active on Twitter and LinkedIn, so if folks have future questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, terrific. Thanks again, and we will be sending out a recording of all this, so you'll be able to share it, all these great insights. So once again, Jigar Shah, everybody, thanks again. Thanks, Jigar.
Thanks, Tor. See you later, Josh.
All right. Bye, everybody.